news has come out today. Let's get into that. So, one thing I'd like to show is periodically there's a few people that come out and say they kind of challenge what I'm saying about the fiscal year. So let's get into this for a second here. I right now there you cannot find anything on the internet that actually tells you that Iraq has transitioned to a new fiscal year. In fact, if you research it, I know like the CIA's website will actually show you most countries' fiscal years. It will still tell you that Iraq's fiscal year is actually January through December, but that's not correct, guys. I know for a fact they've transitioned. I'm going to tell you why. Iraq's fiscal year before they went under Chapter 7 sanctions was exactly where Kuwait's is today, April through March. That historically is Iraq's fiscal year. I know that for a fact because I've already researched it and I've done videos on it, okay, in the past. Now, so last year, Iraq went through all the steps. They had three major things that they did last year. And then the last item, there was three things from last year was they had some type of artifacts that Iraq had to return to Kuwait. There was that Iraq had to give some kind of DNA or something back for all the people that Saddam Hussein had killed on the Kuwaiti side. There was human remains or DNA or something like that information that Iraq had to submit to over to Kuwait. They did that. So they completed all the steps last year that they needed to get out of the Chapter 7s except for one thing, and that was pay off the remaining debt. So if you guys remember from last year, there was an article that said Iraq would have the last remaining funds inside the 2020 budget to pay off the remaining money owed to Kuwait. Okay? But technically, guys, that doesn't come from the 2020 budget. It actually just comes from oil proceeds. And the Iraq's oil money is actually in Washington, D.C. under the kind of the control and care of the U.S. government. Okay? So based on that, the U.S. government actually makes payments each quarter to Kuwait on behalf of Iraq. Okay, so the actual money that's been paid, that's been owed and had to have been paid back to Kuwait has actually been kind of within the hands of the U.S. government because they also have control of Iraq's OPEC oil money. Okay, because of the amount of corruption in the country of Iraq. So anyway, I just wanted to say that to you. Now let's look at this article. Guys, this article is not that old. It's from August 9th of this year, of 2020. It says right in, and I apologize, all I have is a screenshot. I don't have the actual article, but it says Iraq pays Kuwait $210 million in compensation for the invasion. Okay, that was the last remaining amount, and because remember they've been making payments throughout this entire year, so there you go. They paid the last remaining the last remaining amount has been paid. So Iraq is pretty much, I know in the article it also says at the end, it says leaving about $2.6 billion of compensation owed by Iraq. Okay, that doesn't matter because Iraq's pretty much got 90 to 95% of the money owed to Kuwait has been paid off. So as far as the powers that be, they've got Iraq's pretty much being paid off. But like I said, Iraq itself is not handling it. The U.S. is handling this. So the U.S. knows it's going to be completed because it's in the care and control of the U.S. government. Okay, so I'm just showing you here, Iraq's pretty much out of Chapter 7 as of this year. Okay, that's why Iraq was allowed to transition back to their former fiscal year of April through March. So I just wanted to show this to you guys, okay, to kind of confirm on top of the articles you're already seeing, because remember Shabibi himself, this was back in probably around 2011, 12, somewhere there was a long time ago when Shabibi was still the central bank governor. He came out saying, and many of you old timers remember this, I remembered it and I witnessed it, that they can only change the rate at the beginning or middle of the year. Okay? That's that cut and dry, beginning or middle of the year. So that goes to show you that, when I lay this out for you, if you just count the months, I told you April's the first month of their fiscal year. April through September is 6 months. That's the first half of the year. That's why they are preparing the 2020 budget to go into effect as of 10/1, because that starts the 7th month or the second half of the year, okay? So I'm just showing you guys factually that yes, Iraq has indeed transitioned to a new fiscal year, and they're showing that to you based on their actions, okay? I can't, it's not documented anywhere on the internet, but when you look at the real facts, you can very clearly see Iraq has indeed transitioned to a new fiscal year, okay? Just wanted to show that to you. All right, guys, let's get into the amazing articles that came out today. This one, in my opinion, again, this whole video is my opinion and should not be used for financial advice. This one has rate change written all over it. All right. The Minister of Finance stresses the necessity of reviewing the exchange rate of the dinar and reveals the size of the external debt. Let's look at this. The Minister of Finance, Ali Alawi, revealed today, Tuesday, the size of external debts owed by Iraq, while confirming that carrying out concrete economic reforms needs 5 years by finding new alternatives for revenues during his hosting of the House of Representatives today. The media department of the House of Representatives published proceedings of the Parliament session held today and quoted the Minister of Finance as saying that the economic reform program needs a long time to be presented because the economic situation in Iraq is going through a critical situation due to the repercussions of the previous cumulative policies that Iraqi state passed since the 1950s in the last century, and so far especially the legislation of the law on agricultural reform and the decisions of the socialist package, in addition to the loss of the economic vision that weakened the private sector and made all resources in the hands of governments. The Minister of Finance added the current government suffers from a scarcity of funds that forced it to borrow internally and externally and cannot implement the presentation of the paper within the period of time specified by the law voted upon, noting that the specialized team has been formed with a cadre of 40 employees working continuously to work on preparing and presenting the required paper despite the current health conditions, indicating that the reasons for delaying its submissions are technical and historical, setting the ceiling for the government submission of the first negotiable paper at the end of this month, while the reform paper is presented in its final form in the middle of next month. So they're saying they're going to try to present the reform paper in its final form in the middle of next month, okay? But they're also going to try to submit it to Parliament for approval around the end of this month, okay? Remember, I've always told you guys, the reforms, here's why Iraq has delayed the budget. They're showing you right here. I've been telling you guys ever since you've known me, reforms are post rate change, cut and dry. Reforms cannot be implemented till after the rates change, flat out, okay? So, if reforms have been needed for forever, guys. This is nothing new. They've been needed for a long time. But because they're rate change dependent, that means they're waiting on the rate change. So the reforms, again, which are post-rate change, are inside the 2020 budget, okay? That's what makes the 2020 budget married to the rate change, because of the reforms inside of it. That's why they have not shown you a budget, and that's why they have delayed the budget this year, okay, until the very middle of the fiscal year, which would start on 10/1. It's because it's married to the rate change and only can be implemented in the middle of the year, okay? So that's why they are now showing you the budget, because they are going to change the rate. They're ready to change the rate. That's why they're finally showing you a budget, okay? But it all boils down to the reforms. While the reforms are presented in the middle of next month in their final form, they're going to be negotiated upon and kind of discussed by the end of this month. In turn, the Minister of Planning indicated during the session the presence of 6,250 projects under construction that needs to provide 126 trillion dinar to complete them, and this large number of projects causes the failure to include any new project in the new budget law, explaining that the delay in completing projects led to the failure to provide services for citizens, including the existence of 42 unfinished housing complexes that need to be accurately recounted in order to begin their implementation, in addition to the necessity of developing a real reform plan to address the delay in implementing projects. Commenting on the two ministries' answer, the need to fully and not partially implement the legislative law, questioning the value of the internal and external borrowing and the size of what is allocated to pay salaries or in the investment sector, as well as knowing the value of the exchange rate specified in the budget. Minister Alawi pointed out that there are three types of loans, including commercial, that the Iraqi government has moved away from, borrowing from governments, and the third by borrowing from international development institutions such as the World Bank and the Arab Fund for the purpose of investment, especially those related to the requirements of improving the electricity sector by activating previous economic agreements with Siemens, GE, stressing the importance of reviewing the exchange rate so that the Iraqi economy enters the circle of competition with the interest of the International Monetary Fund and the issue of the exchange rate, noting that the ministry received an amount of 15 trillion dinars in full to meet the needs of the salaries. For his part, the Minister of Planning stated the ministry instructed to stop international obligations to pressure spending units, which led to the deprivation of some provinces of services, noting the exception of some projects and the governance that have funds to implement their projects without requiring them for additional funds until liquidity becomes available. At the same time, the importance, especially health institutions and residential complexes in the governance, pointing out that the conclusion of any new project that requires its inclusion in the federal budget law or meets any development gap. And after Mohammed Durai, his inquiries about the feasibility of borrowing an amount of $5 billion abroad despite the lack of benefit from previous loans in meeting the needs and knowing the extent of the continuation of the loan from the Central Reserve. In his response, the Minister of Finance indicated the need to borrow was to support the general budget and fill the deficit without giving support to investment projects, explaining that the trend to borrow from the International Monetary Fund comes because it has specific programs that support countries suffering from financial crises, such as Iraq, with loans for a period of time, 3 years, provided that it is linked to administrative and financial reforms, pointing out that the government opened communication channels with the International Monetary Fund because Iraq has no source for internal borrowing except the Central Bank of Iraq, and the absence of accredited financial markets in Iraq, in addition to the fact that the government banking institutions are overburdened with debts to the government to finance the financial deficit in budgets, and private banks does not have large financial financing. Alawi added that the tangible economic reforms need 5 years by finding new alternatives for revenues. No, the total debt is 80 to 90% of the Iraqi national product, and the foreign debt is 160 trillion dinars, including Kuwait and Saudi debts amounting to $40 billion, citing the lack of possibility for the Ministry of Finance to count the monetary mass in Iraq. For his part, the Speaker of Parliament stressed the necessity of presenting any government move to negotiate any external loan to the relevant parliamentary committees before negotiating with foreign parties, pointing out to tackling the lifting of the financial restriction that the government had taken prior to contracts in the governments that witnessed demonstrations and allowing spending units. He thanked the two ministries of finance and planning for coming to the council and answering the parliament question related to the implementation of the oversight role. Great article, guys. Under the dome of Parliament, the Minister of Finance discloses the reason for the delay in the reform paper. Minister of Finance in the Iraqi federal government, Ali Alawi, revealed on Tuesday the reason for the government's delay in sending the reform paper to Parliament. This came during his hosting a Parliament session, according to what parliamentary source revealed to the news. Finance Minister Ali Alawi made it clear during his attendance at the Parliament session that the reason the government's delay in not sending the reform paper to Parliament was the lack of completion of the domestic and foreign borrowing law to bridge the fiscal deficit for the year of 2020. He added the government did not borrow any external amount, not only locally, that the government dispersed all internal borrowing funds according to the Minister of Finance. Minister Alawi said, according to the parliamentary source, that the government will present the reform paper to Parliament and other concerned parties at the end of this month. According to Alawi, the government is working to stop the waste of public money at all levels, and this will be granted in the economic reform paper. And Iraq had resorted to borrowing to contain the financial crisis that resulted from a significant decline in oil prices during the past months due to the corona pandemic, which paralyzed large sectors of the world economy. Iraq relies on oil to finance up to 95% of state spending. Kademi pledged upon the formation of his government last May to carry out reforms in the country that would improve public services in the country, create the atmosphere for early elections, as well as fight corruption. So there you guys go. They're looking to start the 2020 budget next week and submit the reforms to Parliament for approval around the end of the month. So, like I told you guys, it's all dependent on the rate change. It has everything to do with the rate change. 2020 budget contains reforms. Reforms are post-rate change dependent, and everything's dependent on the rate change, okay? That's why Iraq has not shown you a 2020 budget this year until now, because they were not ready to change the rate. So that goes to show you when you see the budget, you're going to see a rate change, okay? They go together. Anyway, guys, take care and have a wonderful day.